Good Tuesday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for January the 17th. Today we are reading together from Genesis chapter 22, which is the mountaintop pinnacle moment, I believe, of the story of Abraham and the faith that he is growing into. I'm excited to read this text together with you. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this text in our reading today. I have a lot of notes. I have a lot of things I picked up on in studying through this text on a number of occasions. And I'm going to save that for Sunday. I want to preach from this text on Sunday and really dissect the text a lot more than I can get into right now in this reading. So we're going to read it like we normally do. I'm going to make just a couple of comments, and then I'll save the majority of what I'd like to say from this text for Sunday. So I'll be looking forward to that. If you want some more detail about what's going on here in Genesis chapter 22, then come join us at the Loudon Church this upcoming Sunday at 11 a.m. for our worship assembly, where I will be teaching through this text in much more detail. So looking forward to that a lot. But for today, we do want to continue reading through our text and progress our way through the story of Genesis and the Old Testament. This is a really important chapter, of course, because it shows the progression and growth of Abraham's faith, and also at the end sets the stage for Isaac finding a wife here in just a couple of chapters. So let's read together here in Genesis 22 and verse number 1, which is well known as the chapter that includes the sacrifice, quote unquote, the sacrifice of Isaac. Genesis chapter 22, verse number 1, after these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. Here I am, he answered. Take your son, he said. That's what Yahweh said. Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love. Go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. So Abraham got up early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took with him two of his young men and his son Isaac. He split wood for a burnt offering and set out to go to the place God had told him about. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. Then Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there to worship. Then we'll come back to you. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering. Oh, sorry about that. Hit the mouse. Back up to here, Genesis 22 and skip it here. Genesis 22, verse number 6. Sorry about that. Genesis 22, verse number 6. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac. In his hand, he took the fire and the knife, and the two of them walked on together. Verse 7, then Isaac spoke to his father Abraham and said, My father. He replied, Here I am, my son. Isaac said, The fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. Then the two of them walked on together. When they arrived at the place that God had told him about, Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood. He bound his son Isaac and placed him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out and took his knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. He replied, Here am I, or here I am. Then he said, Do not lay a hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your own son from me. Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it as a burnt offering in place of his son. And Abraham named the place, The Lord will provide. So today it is said, It will be provided on the Lord's mountain. Then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, By myself I have sworn, this is the Lord's declaration, this is Yahweh's declaration, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your only son, I will indeed bless you and make your offspring as numerous as the stars of the sky and the sand on the seashore. Your offspring will possess the city gates of their enemies, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed by your offspring because you have obeyed my command. Abraham went back to his young men, and they got up and went back to Beersheba, and Abraham settled in Beersheba. Now after these things, Abraham was told, Milcah also has borne sons to your brother Nahor. Uz, his firstborn, his brother Buz, Kemuel, the father of Aram, Kesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. And Bethuel fathered Rebekah. Milcah bore these 8 to Nahor, Abraham's brother. His concubine, whose name was Arumah, also bore Tebah, Gaham, Tahash, and Maacah. And that is Genesis chapter 22. If you remember yesterday, one of the things I mentioned was the fact that Ishmael was sent away from the family of Abraham because not only was there conflict between the two women, Sarah and Hagar, but there was also the legal issue of if Ishmael stayed within the house, then he would have an opportunity to be the heir and have the inheritance from a legal perspective. But with him being sent away, what it did in a sense is it removed any sort of safety net that Abraham might feel he had with Ishmael. With Isaac being the only son, there was no one else through whom the promise could be given and no one else through whom the promise could be accomplished. Yes, of course, God had said that would be the case anyways, but there really was no one. Therefore, that sets up what we have here in chapter 22. Now, here in chapter 22, God tells Abraham to go offer the only son of promise. And reading into the New Testament, we gain some insight into the text. I believe it's in Hebrews chapter 11. In Hebrews chapter 11, it speaks a little bit about this. Abraham is included in this list of those who showed extreme amounts of faith in Yahweh. It says in Genesis chapter 11, let's see here in verse number Genesis chapter 11, verse number 17. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. He received the promises, and yet he was offering his one and only son, the one to whom it had been said, your offspring will be called through Isaac. He considered God to be able even to raise someone from the dead. Therefore, he received him back, figuratively speaking. What this shows, Abraham being willing to offer up Isaac, again, the only son, the one through whom the promise was given, is it showed his faithfulness and confidence in God to be able to accomplish exactly what he had stated. We talked yesterday about chapter 21 of Genesis being all about God's faithfulness. And that continues to be seen. I know the focus, the emphasis, mostly we think of it being here on Abraham, him showing his faithfulness, but really all of it is pointing towards God's faithfulness. The way all of it works out points towards the faithfulness of God to keep his promises and to be able to accomplish exactly what he said would be accomplished through Abraham and Isaac. So as we're reading the story, I want to encourage us, yes, be thankful, be impressed, not from the standpoint of giving glory to Abraham, but just be impressed with the fact that this man trusted God so much that he was willing to give his one and only son, which again sounds really familiar, doesn't it? Or some of the stuff we're going to talk about on Sunday. But he was willing to do that. But here's God again. Whenever he sees the faithfulness of mankind, God's faithfulness becomes even more obvious and even more abundant in the fact that he did not require for Abraham to actually take the life of his son and offer him as a sacrifice to him. And that shows God's great faithfulness to bless his people in tremendous ways. So as we think about this text here in Genesis chapter 22, and as we think about the continuation of what was seen there in verses 20 through 24 about Rebekah being mentioned, again, that's setting up what we're going to see in chapter 24 with Isaac finding his wife, which again is a provision of God, a sign of God's faithfulness to continue on the lineage of Abraham, because through Rebekah, Isaac is going to have his sons Jacob and Esau, of course, Jacob being the one through whom the lineage is going to continue. But we just continue to see God's faithfulness in every way. Yes, we see the faithfulness of men who trust in God and who are faithful to him and obedient to him, but really it is all just pointing towards God's faithfulness. And of course, the greatest sign of God's faithfulness to mankind is going to be through the lineage of Abraham, through the seed through which all the world is going to be blessed, of course, that being Jesus. And again, there's so many shadows and parallels between what Abraham does here with Isaac and what God does with us, does for us through Jesus. So I'm not going to talk about that now. We'll talk about that more on Sunday. And I hope that will be a good study for us as well, be able to expand upon and expound upon some of the things we've seen here in our daily Bible reading. And I hope to do that throughout the year, take time throughout the year to preach from these texts that we just don't have the time to dive into in a really deep fashion. So we'll take care of that on Sunday. I do appreciate you tuning into this reading though on this Tuesday. And again, if you're looking for a more in-depth study of Genesis 22, then please consider checking out our assembly on Sunday. This upcoming Sunday, January 22nd at 11 a.m., where we are going to discuss in more detail and more depth what takes place here in Genesis 22 and how it ties into Jesus and God's faithfulness towards us. Again, thanks so much for tuning in today. We'll be back at it again tomorrow, reading through Genesis 23. Please continue again to be praying for Joanne, be praying for Mary Lou as well, and also keep Cade Wiley in your prayers. He's in Florida for the next couple of weeks as he's doing some training for his new job. And also, if you don't know, Cade moved over here to Loudon. He's living in the apartments right down the road from Lenore City. Really thankful to have him closer and really appreciate that blessing for him. But please keep him in your prayers as he's out of town for this upcoming Wednesday, Sunday, and another Wednesday. He'll be back a week from Friday. Again, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back at it again tomorrow. Take care and God bless.